Hello and welcome, guys, to the Best of Three podcast. I'm joined tonight by Tom, and we are going to be talking today about do we need an update to the Forbidden Unlimited list? So, first off, I think it's important that we describe why we think an FNL list is needed generically. So, Tom, what's your thoughts? Why do we need a list just in general? And when do we
Okay,
need to update it?
I think that the list is hugely important for the competitive game. Anyone that's played in a tournament will understand the power of cards and how it's important to restrict some strategies. Uh, we've seen some really powerful formats with cards like Spellbook of Judgment, and they would be dominating every single event if they weren't rotated out artificially. Now, on the back of that, I think there are possibly four main reasons why there needs to be progression in the Forbidden Unlimited list, and we can go through each of those. Firstly, dominance of a single deck, I think, presents big problems for the format. So we saw with Spiral in YCS London, they were absolutely dominating the top cut, and that causes problems.
Yeah, for sure. Particularly when we take that point back to a locals environment. When you see a single deck dominant, it generally pushes players away from locals. In the Necros era, to my knowledge, there was a drop off in player base due to how dominant the deck was, and particularly due to how intense the strengths of the deck were. So the fact that something like the Necros of Unicorn would shut down extra deck monsters in a format where any casual or fun deck revolved around its extra deck monsters, it led to a format where not only was there a best deck, but it just wasn't a fun deck to play against unless you were also playing one of the best decks.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Whilst it can be very fun to play mirror matches with a one of best deck, it's often touted as a true test of skill amongst some of the more competitive players. It certainly can drive people away.
Yeah, because part of the fun of the game is innovation. And if you take that
Yeah,
away from players, the skill behind playing the decks is very interesting, and piloting is really important. But it is a trading card game, and it is about deck building as much as it is about the other aspects of play.
yeah. And
And
on the vein of deck building, I think the next part that I would like to address for the importance of updating the list is the stagnation of formats. So when you see all of the lists ending up being the same event after event with very little change, you can need that injection of something new to change things up.
yeah, for sure. So like definitely, it's important to clarify here that there are events where we see one deck do incredibly well and have a large representation, but having large representation at one event isn't really sufficient here. It has to be repeatedly doing well. So like at the start of this format, Spiral would have seen a lot of play, whereas now we see a more evened spread of decks across top cuts, from what I've seen anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Next, there's the overuse of single individual cards rather than a specific deck. So if you have a range of decks, but they are all playing three copies of a specific card, regardless of the deck type, there could be some argument that you'd want to remove that so that those cards would then be choices rather than automatically included in every list. We saw with Blackwing Gofu before the most recent update being played in three across almost every deck.
Yeah, and that's definitely, it's important to note there that these are cards that actively progress the game that cause issues. Whereas, like, something like Gofu, where Gofu just turned into a boss monster essentially, that has a lot more impact than something like Upstart Goblin, where Upstart Goblin is just a case of your deck is this much thinner. And both have been limited to one, but Upstart Goblin definitely had more reasons than just seeing play in every deck, due to Magical Explosion and such.
Now, another reason for updates to the Forbidden Unlimited list can be a preemptive hit based on future releases. Now, we're not always in a position to fully understand the reasoning that might go into these, but there have certainly been occasions where changes have been made based on cards that aren't yet in the TCG card pool.
Yeah, and we saw that with the recent banning of Grand Soil, right?
Grand Soil was actually being used in a dinosaur FTK deck that made the top cut of YCS Rimini, along with Firewall Dragon.
Yes, okay.
Uh,
I stand corrected. But perhaps hitting something like that before it's introduced is something that could be beneficial to the game.
Yes, yeah, it can certainly make a big difference. But having gone over those points, I'd quite like to put forward the case that we're not currently in a position where I feel like there needs to be a change to the Forbidden Unlimited list.
And that's quite a statement, because I do hear a lot of players saying that they feel that the format is stale and that a list should be introduced because Spiral is just so strong at the moment. So do you want to kind of break it down as to why you feel that we don't need a list right now?
Okay, so on the subject of dominance, we haven't recently had YCS results to observe, but looking at the regional metagame across Europe and America, we've actually seen a much more balanced contribution of Spiral, Pendulum, Trickstar, and Lightsworn decks than we were seeing at the start of the format. So I'd argue that right now there isn't a single deck that is dominating the format. Certainly not to the degree where I personally would feel that a list would be needed to counteract that.
Right. So you're saying that due to the fact that there are multiple decks, a list isn't needed. Now, there are a lot of players who feel that the list should be introduced not only to hit Spiral, but also to hit cards in Pendulum Magician and in Trickstar coming up to the Extreme Force release.
Now, I see that, but with Extreme Force on the horizon, you could argue that those would be preempt. We don't even know the full set of cards that we're going to be getting in that set. There are imports from maybe announced, which could significantly impact the development of the format. I'd agree that particularly Pendulum Magicians are in a very strong position with what we currently know, but we can't say for certain exactly what's going to happen.
So at that point, are you suggesting that the list should be implemented immediately after Extreme Force as opposed to at the current moment in time?
Possibly not immediately afterwards, maybe even after an event or two. I think certainly within a month of the release of Extreme Force, once we've had an opportunity to see the impact that it has on the metagame, we would be at a much better time for a list then than we are now, with less than a month until the release of that set.
Yeah, that is completely understandable. Do you have any other points that you'd like to propose as to why you feel that we shouldn't see a list in the near future?
Well, other discussions that I've heard have been about limitation of cards like Ash Blossom or Evenly Matched.
Or Terraforming?
Yes, and Terraforming. So these could be cards that you could argue are overused across all lists. Terraforming, I don't feel so strongly on, as I could well see that card at some point being limited or even forbidden. But cards like Evenly Matched and Ash Blossom, I think, are very important as counteracting the strength of combo decks that exist in the meta now. And I'd argue that their prevalence across all lists says more about the strength of the combos that people are performing than it does about those cards needing to be hit. And that we'd actually be in a much worse place if it weren't for those cards counteracting the decks that exist.
So you think the fact that they are staple trios in the format is actually beneficial to the format rather than causing issues to
Yes,
it?
yes, absolutely. And I would, in a similar vein, be very happy to see Max C being put to 3 or banned. I'm really displeased with it being at 1. I think that that thought is echoed by a lot of the competitive player base.
Right, so it's the idea that there is consistency in what players can expect, and the idea that
Yes.
by having these at 3, as opposed to something like 1, you have a more consistent experience in a tournament, and you can
Oh,
play more
absolutely.
effectively around cards.
I don't think that either of those cards is likely to be immediately banned, and I think that other than being at 0, which is arguable, 3 is absolutely the correct number in both cases.
Right. And do you have any other points that you'd like to propose?
Um, Not other than the fact that I'd like to wait and see what Extreme Force does before we rush into the fact that we think we desperately need a ban list when I'm not so certain that we do.
And do you feel that any cards would be worth coming off preemptively for this list?
I think that most of the cards currently banned have good reasons for being there. There are a few exceptions, the likes of Grand Mole being limited. I don't quite understand. Um,
If there were any one card that I think currently is a problem card and that I dislike the card design of, and which I'm not looking forward to seeing in the next format, I would have to say that Wavering Eyes is incredibly frustratingly designed because the going first, Wavering Eyes is quite strong. Going second, the best out to Wavering Eyes is another Wavering Eyes. And so it feels like a
yeah,
very unfun card to be playing in mirror matches.
yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I wouldn't want. I haven't enjoyed playing in formats where pendulum mirror matches are popular and Wavering Eyes is at 3. So I'd have to agree that that would be one hit that I think
It,
would
it,
be nice to see preemptively.
I may just still be having PSTD from Pepe format, but definitely Wavering Eyes is just one card. It's the only card in the format at the moment that I would consider proactively limiting before a new set comes out. It's
Yes.
completely fine at the moment, but from what testing I've done of the upcoming format, it's just such a powerful card. And there are cards that allow you to do similar things, such as Spell Shattering Arrow, which are much less damaging to the game state, I guess.
Yes, and less awkward self interaction with copies of the opponent's card.
Exactly. It's the way that card interacts with itself makes me want to main Pendulum Impenetrable, which is never a good idea.
Hmm.
Um,
But even with that said, I still stand by my decision that I don't think the game currently needs an update to the list.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, it's a case of us really turning to you guys and asking, like, what do you guys think of the current list? Like, we'd love to read through comments and see what other people are thinking. I do have to lean with you, Tom. I do feel that we're seeing such a spread out format at the moment that we don't really need the interference, but definitely coming into Extreme Force, I would hope that we see a few minor tweaks, not an absolute reset, though.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Tom, and we will see you guys all next week.
Thank you. Bye bye.